speaker is Nicolo Boschetti. I hope I pronounced that correctly, from the Johns Hopkins University. He's pursuing his PhD in civil and system engineering at the Johns Hopkins University and is an assistant researcher at the Aerospace Adversary Lab at the JAU Withing School of Engineering. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in International and Diplomatic Science from the University of Bologna and his master degree in the Politics and Economics of Eurasia from the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And with that, the stage is yours.
Hello, thank you. Yes, as probably you got from the introduction, my background is a bit weird, and today I will present a study that puts together international security, geopolitics, and cybersecurity. We are trying to putting together what is a cyber vulnerability, an electronic vulnerability, with the location of where our assets, our infrastructures are placed. Working together with the Swedish Defense University, we decided soon after the invasion of Ukraine to focus on a specific geographic area, that is the Arctic and the High North, and we tried to map all the space infrastructures of commercial nature, because if we started mapping all EGNOS stations, all other kind of civilian infrastructure, we would have never been able to put all of those assets on a map on an A4 paper for a conference. So we focused on just commercial and specifically ground station as a service. Just to briefly describe what infrastructures, space infrastructure are present in that area, we have, as I said, ground station as a service. I believe that all of us know what they are. Broadband connectivity gateways, for example, OneWeb is deploying gateways and ground stations in the Svalbard Islands and in Greenland. We have launch sites. ESA just inaugurated S-Range Launch Center, but there is also Andoya Space Center. Also in the UK, they are starting to build something. So that is another world of space business that is growing in the European continent and specifically in the Arctic. And then we have what I said that is not present in the map, position, navigation, and timing infrastructures, such as EGNOS. The outcome of the study was this map, where we put all together the ground station as a service and commercial services that we have been able to map and to put into a real map, and we put them in relation with other crucial infrastructure, like the seabed cables that connect all these remote areas to the main continent, and Russian forces, like we use the NATO nomenclature, like I focused on naval capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities, and missilistic capabilities, and we also put it in relation with the presence of Chinese scientific installations in the area. What are the main takes from this map before moving to the other result of the study? So that is a qualitative analysis of what regions of our Arctic and High North are more secure and more safe for space operations. The first one is that ground stations of the same network are dispersed around a very vast area. That is quite intuitive and self-explanatory, but they are all connected with the main centers of operation by very fragile infrastructures that are several meters, hundreds or more below the water. And as the events following the invasion of Ukraine demonstrated, it's not so difficult to place bombs or to do something to underwater infrastructure. We saw it with the Nord Stream 2. And for example, if we look at the Svalbard undersea cable system, you see two cables, because there is, of course, a redundancy. But if these two cables are cut, Svalbard, without a satellite backup, that in case of downlink of huge amounts of data is usually not sufficient, they are completely cut off at the continent. And for example, in CYSAT, CSAT installation, many data from Copernicus missions are downlinked. We lose those data if something happens. And 1 year ago, one of the two cables was disrupted, was cut. Because sometimes even fishing vessels do that. It can happen. But if you want to do it in a malicious way, in some of these areas, especially in international waters, we have a threat and a vulnerability of these systems. Then this was, of course, made worse after the increase in tension between NATO and Russia with the invasion of Ukraine. Like now we have a huge number of ground stations and specifically also specifically Sweden and Finland that now are accessing NATO, Finland already did, that are extremely close to the border with Russia. And in the Kola Peninsula and specifically Murmansk, there is a very high concentration of electronic warfare capabilities. They have the biggest systems there. So like Brandon before described like rogue stations, interception of signals, but also jamming. We have been talking about the jamming and spoofing for 2 days. Like it's quite easy in such a geographical concentration of assets to have that kind of threats. And lastly, we noticed it's not very publicly announced, like they don't publicize it that much, but they are putting a lot of scientific stations in crucial areas of the Arctic, and like they are extremely close to our assets, and we don't know exactly what is being done there. Like there are for sure satellite antennas that we were able, like with open source intelligence sources, to assess that, and but we cannot, of course, go there and understand what they are doing. We know for sure that, for example, the Svalbard one and the Greenland one are downlinking data from Shenzhou spacecrafts of the Chinese space program. So if they can downlink those data, they can downlink also others or like emit signals. And then, as I was saying, there is another outcome. We divided in a qualitative way because like from a geographical and strategic point of view, it's difficult to do it in a quantitative way, in a scientific, precise way. We described what are, in our opinion, the safest regions where to put new ground stations, because these ground stations are already in place. We cannot like move them. So like the risk is in place, and the main take is that like, okay, these are present there. We have to think in a direction and remember some of the threats. This is like a very, like I already mentioned many of them. This is a very high level example of the many threats that are present and are explicitly exacerbated by this situation. And I just put it here because we are at a space cybersecurity conference, but I believe that when we are talking about cybersecurity, we have also to remember that cybersecurity is strongly connected with electronic security and also physical security. I was talking about the seabed cables. Yes, you can cut off them, you can put a bomb, but you can also do something with those cables, like they are fiber optic cables, so you can divert signal, you can intercept signals. And again, is assessed that the Russian Navy has the capabilities, the submarine capabilities to do that, like to reach and not just put a bomb, to do something. So we divided this map in 8 security regions. And I won't spend much time on this slide because of course there is a description in the original paper of the characteristic of all these regions, but we assessed that putting together the distance between the ground stations and the Russian forces, the dependability, how much dependent is the infrastructure on those submarine cables that can be easily disrupted, etc., etc., we found that the region 3 is probably the best where to put ground station, because you are a bit more distant from Russia in case of land invasion, that apparently is not so unlikely anymore, and you are in the main continent, you don't have to pass information through those seabed cables. And right now there is only one station by CYSAT in that region. So for the ground station as a service operators in the room, here. This is, again, the very brief description of each region. I won't go through all of them. Just it's quite self-explanatory that the 8th region, that is the one that has Ukraine inside, is the most dangerous right now. And of course, we talk and describe all the strategic problems of some other areas. For example, Iceland and Greenland. Right now, like in the Cold War, there are international waters. It's named the GUKN gap, where a lot of Russian submarines and before Soviet submarines are passing, and they can disrupt something. You can put EW capabilities also on a vessel. So even if like you are in the middle of the ocean, you are not totally safe. And then of course like regions that are more distant from the border and not reliant on infrastructure that can be easily disrupted, of course, from an electronic point of view and a physical point of view, they are much more difficult to disrupt, and they are less interesting from threat analysis. Now, this that I presented till now was the material from a paper that was originally presented at the IEEE Military Communication Conference in November last year in Bethesda. And for today, just to give a bit more of technicality and also describe how what I just presented translates in the reality, we decided to put together also another analysis that was presented a couple of months ago at IEEE AeroConf conference in Montana. That is an analysis, an architectural analysis of the different ground station as a service networks that are present on the market, because like most of them are similar between each other. Like of course they offer different services, different products. Each one has small differences, but since in the literature it was not present like an attack tree analysis and a real architectural analysis of how they are organized, we decided to analyze all of them, try to high level them, and create some reference architectures to then perform an attack tree analysis and understand how, if it's easy, if it's difficult, how you can perform an attack on a network like that. So this is a very simple description of what is a ground station as a service. I think that the slide was probably useless. And this was the outcome of the study. We divided the market and the different networks into 3 categories: single ground station provider, semi-virtualized; single GS provider, fully virtualized; and multi-ground station provider, fully virtualized. Just a few words on what means virtualized or semi-virtualized. Right now in the ground station as a service market, there is like a growing in products cloud-based that give to the user, to the customer, the possibility of more easily control the satellite, not just downlinking data and receiving them from the operator, or like not even needing infrastructure on the user side, but perform all the analytics, all the analysis of the data in cloud that is provided, of course, by the ground station as a service provider. Let's think about AWS, Microsoft Azure, and other systems that are a bit more older or also new, like LeafSpace is here in these days, like as a less virtualized approach that gives to the customer less freedom of the data before receiving them in the endpoint, but like as some, from a security point of view, some perks and some icon downs. And the other bit of the study was like describing how to attack a ground station as a service network, and we described it through an attack tree analysis method that is a more or less standardized method that describes how to do something through different levels of complexity of the TTPs. And to describe such a complex network, we decided to divide this action, the action of a possible attacker. This is a case study about false data injection. We are seeing how much important our ground station right now, again, in the war in Ukraine. Lots of satellites are taking pictures of Russian army in Ukraine. They are downlinking the data, sending them to the Ukrainian army, and so they can fight back. If you inject false data, you can say the Russians are somewhere, and maybe someone dies. So this is an example of a false data injection. This is the attack tree on how to do it, and why we decided to put this analysis together with that map, because apart from the satellite that is flying very far, so it's not interesting from an Arctic and High North point of view, all the other elements of this attack tree are more or less prone to the threats that I described before. So like, from a security point of view, the main take is that like, yes, we have to secure cybersecurity in the different nodes that are the ground station, the antenna, the ground backbone, what is connecting the antenna to the main network. It can be the seabed cables or land cables, the point of presences, the data centers, and then the cloud that, of course, are usually inside the data center, but like they are a virtual place of entrance for attackers. And as I was saying, there is a cybersecurity concern, but it is strongly related to the electronic threats that can be quite interesting for injecting data, and also the physical threats that are less interesting for false data injection, even if, as I said, you can get to those underwater cables and mess with them. But these are the main things to keep in mind when we are talking about the cybersecurity of such complex networks in such difficult to monitor areas, because like monitoring what is happening many meters underwater close to the Svalbard is much difficult. You cannot do it with the satellites. It's difficult to do it with the vessels. In the North, this is happening. We have many cases of GNSS spoofing in North Norway. We have a lot of vessels from Russian army and Chinese army that are shipping around in those areas in international waters. It's illegal, but we don't know exactly what they are doing. So we wanted to provide like a description of what is happening up there and why it's important, not only for the space sector, but also for us as cybersecurity researchers and people in general. These are the two papers. You can find them on ResearchGate or on the website of the conferences. And they were written by me together with some colleagues of my lab, the Aerospace Adversary Lab, my professor Gregory Falkov, always from Johns Hopkins University, and other cooperators and co-authors. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We already have the first question online. So, ground station as a service are most often provided from multiple sites in different threat areas, reducing the overall risk. Is that taken into account in the study?
Yes, absolutely, is taken into account. But of course, for example, the attack tree that I showed is false data injection. Like having many ground stations all around the world doesn't reduce the risk of false data injection, for example. And then yes, this augments the redundancy of the system, but you can have several attacks, several goals by the attacker that can be carried out even attacking just a single ground station or few ground stations in a specific geographic area. So yes, it's taken into account, but from an Arctic and North point of view, it was interesting to focus on attacks that can be carried out in that way.
All right. Question from me. So since the research has, I guess, quite some political value, did you get in touch with some political bodies regarding your research, or have political bodies gotten in touch with you regarding your research, either in a positive or negative way?
Thankfully not. No, not directly. Of course, when it was presented the first time, of course, it was a military communication conference. So the crowd, that was the crowd. And of course, someone said, hey, you are missing a lot of points. Someone else said, hey, we never thought about how important are seabed cables. Because, for example, seabed cables in the vast majority of the cases are private. Like they are operated by commercial operators. So sometimes states are not able to surveil them or to say, no, guys, we have to change the location. So sometimes operators don't think about the nature of some infrastructure that are critical, but are totally commercial and are often completely forgotten because they are very far below the water. So we don't think about them.
All right, do we have a question in the room? Then one more question from me. We heard in the beginning your background is neither cybersecurity nor space. So how did you get into this space security topic?
Well, that is not in space is not completely true. Initially as an international security researcher, I did a master thesis on space warfare and space security. I studied the strategy and the policies of the Russian Federation. That's why I was there, trying to understand what they were doing. And so after doing that, I decided that I needed to understand how systems work to talk about them. So I decided to move to engineering, and cybersecurity in space is the new biggest topic. It's probably the most dangerous topic, and it was interesting to put effort into it, I believe.
All right. Thank you very much again.